Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we have a guest that will probably look familiar to all of you. We have the amazing Dr. Darrel Ray on again tonight. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so looking forward to this.
We love having you on. It is not only informative, but it is so entertaining. I don't think we ever smile so much or laugh so much, even though it's a serious topic that we're talking about. So we're so happy that you came back to be with us again. Landon, why don't you read his bio quickly, just for those of our listeners or viewers who might not have caught our other episode with Dr. Ray. And we will link that episode in our show notes so you can catch up if you haven't had a chance.
Yeah. Dr. Darrel Ray is an American organizational psychologist and author who focuses on topics such as workplace organizational culture, secular sexuality, and the treatment of religion-induced trauma. He's a public speaker, podcaster, and atheist activist, and founded the nonprofit organization Recovering from Religion, as well as the Secular Therapy Project. So one of our favorite people, his sex book is what we talked about, I think, on the last one, and that's just a fun book, how sex and religion tie in. And tonight we're going to talk about his book, The God Virus.
The God Virus. That's
Yes.
right. And you may have heard mentioned in the bio, Recovering from Religion, which is this organization that supports, people like our listeners and viewers who have stepped away from Mormonism, but all religions. And my favorite thing about you, Dr. Ray, is that I don't know, when you've studied so many different religions and so many people that have left, but Mormons, you always say, oh dear, like
I do.
We're a special breed.
Before we get through tonight, there's at least one Mormon story I've got to tell you about
please.
my honeymoon, but we'll not do that right now. I'm just, what do you call it? Leading you on here.
Yes.
That's right. A teaser for the end. So,
a teaser, yeah.
But what I mean by that, everybody, is that, he studies everybody across the board. And yet there's just some special things about Mormonism and those that have left in the high demand, high control that, I think shock even you sometimes when you hear about them. Like, for example, in the other book that we covered, which was Sex and God, How Religion Ruins Sexuality, and it's back here somewhere. Dr. Ray came across the little factory talk. And I think you said you thought it was a joke, maybe, right?
At first I did. Yeah.
Could not believe it.
Yeah, well, I've since learned that it wasn't, and I've met many Mormon boys, because they weren't giving it to girls back then. Many Mormon boys that were my age that said, "Oh yeah, I remember that. That was a real thing."
Yeah,
yes,
in fact, in that book, there's a whole chapter on that factory talk because, from Dr. Ray's perspective, so damaging. Like you said, the rest of us of a certain age lived through that. It was just what we did in common knowledge, but from his perspective. So I would recommend that book. We'll include that in the show notes for sure. But as Landon mentioned, tonight we are here to talk about another book this book is so important. I would encourage everyone to run out and get it right now. Honestly, it's called The God Virus, How Religion Infects Our Lives and Cultures. Now, it's not a new book. It's an older book, but it is absolutely as relevant at this moment as it was when it was written years ago. And so we're actually reading this book in our book club that we run, the Good Book Club, but we thought this was so important that we just wanted to have Dr. Ray on to just kind of go through some of the concepts in this book and just have a discussion about it, because Landon and I have both found this just absolutely, well, let's use a Mormon word, revelatory, haven't we, Landon?
I've been having so much fun with this book. I keep calling Rebecca up. Oh my gosh, look, listen to this in this chapter. This is so true. This is what they do.
Yeah, it's our new Bible. That's what we're trying to say. It's our new Bible. We're going to join the cult of Dr. Ray. That's right.
That's right.
There you go.
So I guess maybe just
send 10% of your paycheck, please.
and you're 20 years, 30 years younger than our current prophet. So
maybe 40, honestly.
Maybe 40 could be.
Oh my gosh, Jiminy Christmas.
It's true. So maybe just start, talk about how this book even came to be. Why did you decide, I've got to write this? How did you develop this concept? Let's just dive in and start talking and see if we can help our listeners and viewers kind of understand, what this book is about. And of course, we're encouraging everyone to go out and buy it and read it for themselves, but we will just cover some of the major concepts in it tonight with the author, Dr. Ray.
So this book started when I was in seminary in 1975. I can trace the roots of this book clear back to that spot because I was taking a course on comparative religion. I was in a seminary at the time, but it was a very liberal seminary. They had some really interesting coursework in anthropology and sociology and the sociology of religion. So I was taking all these courses, and I ended up at the end having to write a major project. And I came across this essay that was written in 1970, I believe it was, by I believe Rodney Stark, and it was called the American Civil Religion. I've never heard of that before. It made no sense. The American Civil Religion. So I dove into that, and I ended up writing a pretty big major paper that I got an A+ on in a graduate school. And
Wow.
everybody told me, it was from Dr. Hirschhorn, that was his name. After I got this paper, I'm just standing there thinking, everybody told me you can't get an A from this guy. All you get is B+ at best. And I get an A+. At that moment, I knew, okay, this idea's got legs. But I filed it away. And years later, my best friend was here to visit me, and we got to talking about it. I loaned him the only copy, can I use 4-letter words here?
Yes, you can.
The only fucking copy I had. How stupid can you be?
Well, this sounds like the 116 pages of Joseph Smith, right? That he loaned out and they got lost forever. So
Yeah,
we get that.
exactly.
I think he might have said the F word too at that moment.
So I lost this. I didn't even remember I loaned it to him. And about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I'm sorry, this friend reappears. I hadn't talked to him in a while. And he said, I found this. I was going through my stuff and I found this essay. Would you like it back? I said, oh, hell yeah. So he sent it back to me. I reread it. I said, damn, this is good stuff. So it just prompted me to start writing. And what you read in the God Virus is actually chapter 3. That's the essay, or that's actually what I wrote in chapter 3 was obviously a drastically updated and modernized version compared to what I would have written. But I started writing. I had read back in the early 2000s. I had read Daniel Dennett. I had read Christopher Hitchens. I had read Richard Dawkins, and I had read Sam Harris.
Who's the fourth
all four of those
horseman?
books.
That's right.
The Four Horsemen. I loved every one of those books with a huge but. B, capital B, capital U, capital T. Not one of those fucking books helped you deal with the consequences of being infected with these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they're great books. And I can't tell you how many people have said, I left my religion because of Richard Dawkins. So that's all great. All great. But when you leave the religion, there's a psychological, emotional consequence to doing that, as you both well know. Mm-hmm. So I said, nobody's writing about the psychology, that the emotional impact, the mental illness issues, that none of that stuff is getting written about by those 4 authors. And I have obviously a lot of interest in psychology. So I just started writing. I wrote the first chapter. I thought, I'm just going to write. I wasn't writing a book. I was writing an article. So I thought, I'm going to write an article and send it off to somewhere to get published. I wrote the first article and I sent it off to my best friend, another friend than what I mentioned earlier, Dr. Dan Dana.
You saved a copy this time, right?
Yeah, it was electronic this time, electronic. and Dan comes back, yeah, this is really good. And so I write another article and send it off to him. In fact, I got a third one. I sent it off to him. So he's reading almost all 3 of what became later the first 3 chapters. And he comes back to me with this long email saying, Darrell, I have never read anything like this in my life. This is really interesting stuff. Well, my friend Dan is not one to bullshit me. If I'm full of shit, he'll tell me. And when he comes back like that, I said, okay, I got something here. So I just kept writing, kept sending him chapters until I had a whole book. And I literally, Rebecca, I had not started writing a book. I started writing articles, and this turned out to be the book. So it was kind of an accident. I'd already written 2 other books. I'd written the Teaming Up book and the Performance Culture book for my business. And those were, major works for sure. and sold really well, but I'd never written in this area. So I'm a brand new name. Nobody knows who I am, and I have no credibility as an author in that area. I have plenty of credibility, in organizational psych stuff, but not here. So it was a big gamble. And one day I announced to my staff, I had 5 staff working in my basement. I ran my consulting firm out of my basement. I announced at a staff meeting that I was writing this book, and my office manager just goes white as a sheet and says, "Darrell, we're going to lose customers over this." So I said, "Well, I don't care. I've got to write it. I'm not writing it for money. I'm not going to make money off of it. But I've studied this my whole life, and I now understand there's a whole book in me that I didn't know was there, of course." And so I finished writing it. I published it, got it out there, and 6 months later, I didn't have a business. All but 2 of my clients, poof, gone. So I lost my whole business, and I hadn't planned on retiring for another 3 to 5 years. So losing my whole business kind of forced that issue. So I ended up retiring earlier than I thought. And dang, if I wasn't shocked, but the book sold way better than anybody predicted. And I ended up making almost as much money from the sales of the book as I would have if I'd still been in business. So I had a bridge income until I really could retire. Well, that was a cool thing. But it also told me there's a big need. People need to understand the psychology of all this. And I could tell you lots more around that. But we're wanting to focus on the book, not how the book got written. So that's the quick story of how it got written.
That's the backstory. No, that's important though. It is important to figure out, because you saw the vision of it decades earlier, and then worked on it. So yeah, that's amazing.
So
and that's why you'll go ahead.
Your book came from, I think, kind of Dawkins. What is it? The God DNA, or I'm trying to remember.
God delusion.
Yes.
Yep.
And then that kind of that's where you got the idea kind of the virus idea.
No, that idea came out of the 14th chapter of his book called The Selfish Gene.
Selfish Gene, that's the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then an essay he wrote, Viruses of the Mind essay he wrote in I believe it was 89. Those two were more directly influential on my book, and I thank Dawkins up front that he helped influence that. And I've met Dawkins, I don't know, half a dozen times over. I've even in one of Dawkins' documentaries. Have you seen Sex, Death, and the Meaning of Life?
Are you in that? Yes, I have seen that. You are in that.
Yeah, right. About the 12 minutes into the very first hour.
That's right.
There I am.
That's
talking
right.
about masturbation.
What else? Come on. You're the little factory guy.
That's right. So tell us a little bit about the virus, because this concept is really cool as you start following through. Tell us kind of how you use this metaphor throughout the book, because it's fantastic. You can't look at things. We look at it completely different now after reading this.
I did too. When the idea hit me from Dawkins' idea of the viruses of the mind, it blew my mind too. And I started seeing the world in very different. And remember, when I wrote that civil religion article way back when, I didn't have the virus idea yet. So putting those two together is what made things much more interesting. So here's the deal. I think there's an enormous amount of psychological manipulation that religions do. And there's almost no books that have documented how that psychology works and why it works. None. I can't find any. If that's not to say there aren't books that look at psychology from religion at somewhat psychologically, but there's nobody ever sat down outside of the religion and looked back into it and said, okay, how did I get, to use my word here, infected with the religion? I got it from my parents. How do most people get a new religion? They get it from their parents. And then I'm an amateur historian. I would almost say I'm not a professional because I've never made money off it, but you see my library here. About
I
half
was
of those
being impressed.
half of those books are history books. So I have studied the history of religion down to the gnat's ass. I can tell you shit you probably never want to know. In fact, I was talking to my partner last night about the piece of music from England, and I started going down into a rabbit hole, and she just sat there looking at me like, "Have you got three heads?"
You know too much for your own good. That's what.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But what I found from Richard Dawkins is how do ideas spread? And he was the one who created the term memes, M-E-M-E, meme. Now we see memes all the time. People are using that term, but they're not using it in the same way that Dawkins, or not quite the same way Dawkins intended it. What Dawkins said was genes go from one person to the offspring. So my daughter, my son have parts of my genes. They have parts of my ex-wife's genes. So we have propagated that genome has gone from me to my offspring. And that's how genes work. And in his book, The Selfish Gene, he says in the book that genes selfishly, they don't really care about you. They want to get from you to the next person. That's all a gene wants to do. If we can use the term wants, it's not, I'm anthropomorphizing there, of course. But what it really means is that genes, think about the sickle cell anemia gene. It wants to go from me to you, but it's not good for me, and it's not good for you if you're my progeny. So, but it's still, the genes are going to go, and we see bad genes going from one person next all the time. We also see lots of good genes, of course, but it's the bad ones that can really be parasitic. Genes can be looked on as good for you or even parasitic, because if you think about it, most of the genes in our genome, most of the DNA in our genome are not genes. They're hangers on. They're viruses that got themselves implanted into our genome. So they're parasites for all practical purposes. And as you saw in the beginning of the book, I start with parasites. I start with the Toxoplasma gondii, and I say, well, how does a disease spread? How do ideas spread? And you can look at these two and say, wow, that's really interesting. Ideas spread from one brain to the next. Parasites can spread from one organism to the next organism. We just got finished with COVID pandemic. How did that happen? It's a virus that goes from my respiratory tract to your respiratory tract when I sneeze or something like that. And then it dawned on me one day, some Jehovah's Witnesses came to my door and they knocked on it. And I said, what are they trying to do? They're trying to sneeze on me. They're trying to give me they're trying to give me their religion. I thought, well, that's like a virus too. This is all happening while I'm exploring this idea that Richard Dawkins first explored. And that's it. That it's a virus that spreads from mind to mind. Only it doesn't go like genes do. It goes more like parasites do. And so that's why I began the whole book with Toxoplasma gondii, which is a parasite that, this is convenient because a parasite changes the way you perceive your world. The Toxoplasma gondii infects and many of your listeners may be familiar with this. It's a parasite that resides in the feces of cats. So pregnant women are advised to stay away from cat feces because it can literally kill the fetus. So that to familiarize your audience with why I use that. So why is that important? It's because this Toxoplasma gondii affects the brain of a rat. That's where it gets its start, so to speak. It affects the brain of the rat and turns off or switches the rat's fear of cat pheromones. So usually most rats, when they smell a cat pheromone, an odor of a cat, if you will, they run the other way. But not if it's infected with Toxoplasma gondii. If it's infected with that parasite, it does the opposite. It loves the smell of cats and goes near it. And we've got so many experiments now that show this is we've known this for about 30 years. The parasite controls the brain of the rat. Now, you may think I'm crazy here, but all of us know about rabies. And we all know that rabies change the behavior and brain of dogs if they get it. So the fact that animals can have their brains changed, their perceptions of the world, the way they interact with their world, radically changed that in ways that would hurt them is really common. It's very common in nature. Well, what if we had ideas that were parasitic? And that's where I started understanding what the God virus does. I could have called it the God parasite. I could have called it the God fungus, but viruses seem to, people have a good understanding of it. And today they have a much better understanding with COVID and all, it's really a big thing. So that's where the idea comes from. How do ideas get from one brain to the next? Here's the way it works. If my genes don't go from me to my daughter or my son, then those genes don't go anywhere. They're dead. If ideas can't get from my brain to your brain, those ideas die. During the time that Mormonism was developed by Joseph Smith in upstate New York, there are about 128 other religions being developed at that same time. And that area was called the Burned Over District, which, I wrote about in the book. You've read about it already. Yeah.
You have a lot of Mormon references in the book. Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah.
You guys are a low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Why, thank you so much. Are you saying we're a super virus? Is that what we are, Dr. Ray?
I almost say that. We come back to that, but yeah, I almost say Mormonism is a super virus. So this is all these out of 128 religions that started over about a 20 or 30 year time frame in the upstate New York. Only 3 of those religions still exist today. One of which is Mormonism, one of which is Jehovah's Witnesses, one of which is Seventh-day Adventists. I think there's a 4th one maybe. But anyway, it's like biological evolution. Most species that have ever lived on this planet have gone extinct. I mean, you can look at the fossil record, you don't see dinosaurs, you don't see trilobites, they've gone extinct. Most religions on the history of this planet have gone extinct. And the reason they go extinct is because they lost the ability to get from one brain to the next brain. So it is very important for religions to have psychological tools to be able to infect new people. Most of the time, that means children, because it's really easy to infect children with new viruses or novel ideas like religions. So viruses love immune systems that have no resistance to them. And a child has an immune system that has no resistance to perhaps many viruses. That's why kids are always coming home with runny noses and sniffles, and they share germs all over the place when they're in kindergarten or preschool. I know Barb, my partner's a preschool teacher, so I'm very aware of this. I don't know if that had any influence on it, but so anyway, so that's where it comes from. Viruses of the mind, which religion is one virus of the mind. Now, there are many different viruses of the mind, and I'm not denying that. There's a lot of different bad viruses, if you will, of the mind. But I wanted to only focus on religion because it is such a huge one. It has impacted society so profoundly for thousands of years. And there's 1 or 2 parasites in human history that have had the kind of impact on humans that religion has, and maybe no more than that. I mean, clearly malaria has probably, no, we don't suffer from it here, but if you were 200 years ago, malaria was worldwide, and it continues to be one of the most heinous diseases. Smallpox, diphtheria, there's all sorts of those really big diseases that we now have immunity because we get vaccines for them. And then it dawned on me, wow, vaccines. How does someone become immune to a virus? Well, you get a vaccine. How do we immunize kids from religious infection? Well, we teach the children that all other religions are bad and you're going to hell if you go with those religions, but this one's okay. Mm-hmm. So the Catholics immunize all their kids against Mormons, and Mormons immunize their kids against Catholics, and so forth. Because Can you name a religion that doesn't say all other religions are wrong? I mean, that's a part of the immunization process. So I think that's the quick answer to your, or the long answer to your quick, short question there, Landon.
No, that idea was just incredible to me as I listened to, you know, what you were saying and the ideas that you had there. And one of the interesting things on that rat virus that you talked about was you noted that it only affects the rat when a cat's around, but it does every other rat thing it normally does.
Mm-hmm.
If you watch the rat when a cat's not around, it looks like a rat until the cat comes, and then it runs towards the cat. And you pointed out that that's how, because we always ask ourselves, especially as post-Mormons, how do people believe that? Why, you know, we believed it and we're going, why did we believe that? How could we be so cautious everywhere else in our life about looking at things and making sure we weren't, critical thinking in the rest of our lives, but we shut it down for religion. And your virus, that cat virus I did, it just, wow, yeah, that's it. It's a parasite. It's closed down one portion of your mind. So you look normal in every other case, but you're not looking outside. And when that cat comes, you go running towards it rather than away from it.
No, it made me understand, for example, my dad, who was a scientist and yet believes that the earth is only 6,000 years old. You know, he was a scientist. It's that compartmentalization. There's only one part there. I always sometimes refer to Mormons as sleeper cells, or maybe any religious person, that, you know, there's a moment where the virus kicks in and then you do what it is you're supposed to do, be it run at a cat or kick out your LGBTQ child, or, you know, you go against your natural instinct because this virus is there. Yeah, that concept was really important, I thought.
I think the notion that the God virus can make you go against your basic humanity, like kicking your own children out, is powerful. When people say, well, religion doesn't affect you that much, I can respond, well, religion can make you be the most perverted sexual being alive. And how does it, and here's my question to you two. What is the most perverted sexual thing a person could be? Don't answer that question.
Oh, okay.
You might. I'll give you the answer, though. A Catholic priest or a nun.
Oh.
What could be more perverted than denying your own sexual being, your own sexuality? And then, of course, where do we see enormous amounts of child abuse, sex abuse, rape? We see it among Catholic priests and nuns. So when we suppress something that's so natural, how is it suppressed? It's suppressed with purity culture ideas, which are simply God viruses. Purity culture has been around forever. You read the New Testament, your Old Testament, that purity culture is everywhere. You stone your daughter if she's not a virgin when she gets married. Isn't that purity culture in the worst sense? Or being Islam, you know, you cut your daughter's head off if she's not a virgin when they marry. So yeah, there's some really interesting ideas that you can start exploring. And when you start exploring, as you both have noted, it starts opening your eyes. Well, that's why the church does this. And that's why the Catholics have this problem. And that's why nuns are celibate. It's because the virus can control you in amazingly strong ways that you have no. I mean, those priests and nuns would never admit they're being controlled by an idea. Any more than a Buddhist monk would say, who's celibate, would say it's being controlled by an ideology either.
Yeah, I thought it was I thought it was really important when you talked about the motivation. Like you said, you might not understand why something is so important to a religion until you look at it from the idea of making sure that the virus survives. So even the concept, like you discuss, of this, especially in Mormonism, focus on the family, right? The heterosexual family. Why is that so important? And that goes along with purity culture and all of that. Well, where is the virus, the religion, more likely to survive? It's more likely to survive with a mom and a dad indoctrinating their kids. Therefore, you know, you have to make sure that is the, the construct that we're going to raise children in for indoctrination. Once you start seeing it that way, that the whole motivation is to make sure that virus survives from one brain to another, everything makes sense. All the strange rules and the constructs and the reasons that we have to do things. Didn't you find that, Landon, when you looked through it? It just kind of brought it all together, I thought.
Absolutely. And I was hoping that Dr. Ray could go to the next thing is the vector and the idea of a vector, because that's the whole family idea and the priest idea. Can you explain what a vector is?
Yeah, I sure can. Before I do that, though, I'll just say that I do say in that piece of it, Rebecca, I talk about instead it should be called not focus on the family, but focus on the virus. That would be the way to calculate that, because they don't really give a shit about gay families. They don't give a shit about Muslim families. They only give a shit about a few very narrow band of families that happen to belong to their particular God virus.
The ones carrying the virus. The ones carrying their virus are the ones they care about.
Yeah, that's the only ones they care about. And when you understand that, then it helps you understand that it's much more like a mosquito carrying a malaria virus. A mosquito is a vector. In biology, we call that a vector that carries a disease from one person to, or from one organism to the next organism. And we know that there's a lot of different diseases that mosquitoes are vectors for. But other things can be vectors. Snails can be vectors for viruses. There's a spirit, I can't remember the name of it's a little hair worm that infects the brains of grasshoppers. And when it takes over control of grasshopper and makes the grasshopper jump from the grass into the water where a fish will eat it. And when the fish eat it, then the fish get the parasite in them. And then it's a whole cycle that then starts all over again. We didn't explain earlier that the rat gets eaten by the cat. And the only place that the Toxoplasma gondii can survive is in the gut of the cat. It cannot survive in the gut of a dog or gut of an owl. So the rat continues to be afraid of owls and dogs, but not of cats. So it's very specific. It controls the brain in very, very specific ways. Religion does the same thing. And religion has to have a way to carry the virus over, much like a mosquito carries the malaria virus over, or the Toxoplasma gondii has to have the cat to carry the Toxoplasma gondii into the next rat. And that's what we call a vector. Well, in religion, how does it get from one brain to the next? It has to have a vector. And the vector, in many religions, it's called a priest, or it's called an imam, or it's called a monk, or it's called a preacher, or it's called an elder in Mormonism. You guys have got a unique approach. Sorry, I shouldn't say you guys, because you don't have that anymore. You don't have that virus anymore.
Oh, it's still everywhere surrounding us. Yes, all our
Around
family members and all our friends. Yes, so
right. So that if you have a good vector, then that vector can help infect lots of other people. One mosquito could infect many people with malaria. So it's very efficient at helping the plasmodium. That's what malaria is. It's a plasmodium parasite. The mosquito can bite me, then it can bite you, it can bite you. By the end of the night, we can have 5 people with malaria from one single mosquito, and then the mosquito will come back tomorrow night and do more. So it's very efficient way to spread the plasmodium. Well, religion, we see vectors as like priests or ministers, and their job is to make sure that the ideas get from his brain into your brain. So you get the Joel Osteens of the world, who have hundreds of thousands of followers, and his brain is infecting all these other brains with these crazy ideas. And that's what a priest is in the Catholic Church. He's gone through usually about 8 years of really intense training that denies everything about his humanity and sexuality, so that he can now go out and infect all sorts of people. You would think it's inefficient. It's inefficient for a priest to be celibate, because then he won't have any children. So his genes won't get passed on. So this is how powerful the Catholic God virus is. It's so powerful. It says, you don't get to propagate your genes, Mr. Priest or Mrs. Nun. You don't get, but you do get to propagate the Catholic God virus. And so the virus prospers because I can now go out and teach hundreds of people to have lots and lots of children and get infected with Catholic viruses. Catholics were known for centuries for having big families. Well, the same thing is true of any successful religion. They will have had a long period in their history where were known for having lots of children. Look at Orthodox Jews, 8-10 children per family. Look at early Mormons. I mean, everybody was having, if you had 6 kids, you must be slacking off if you're a Mormon in 1890.
57. Yeah, 57 with 8 wives. Yeah.
Yeah, you had lots of wives too.
Yep, that's the formula.
I hadn't got there yet, but I was getting there. Yeah, there's so much. So it's so important to have a vector. So there's almost no, I really can't think of, well, there are some religions, and we can talk about those, but most religions have a designated vector, whether it be an elder or a priest or a Buddhist monk or, whatever it is. It's somebody that's the repository, a successful repository of the God virus, and has the skills to infect other people. That's why the mega churches are so important to Christianity right now, because there's so much resistance to what we now think of as traditional Christianity in our culture. I mean, people are dropping out of churches like flies. And the places where they're dropping out the most, according to the latest Pew survey of religion in the United States, is small churches of less than 200. So if you're a small church of less than 200 members, you're dying. And so these buildings, you go around a major city, you'll see all sorts of churches just empty because they've died. The vectors were not successful at infecting people. So those religions are dying in those neighborhoods completely. They're gone. They'll never come back. Maybe another religion might get in there, but that one's not going to get in there. And that was because they had unsuccessful vectors. Because in this day and age, the competition among ideas, lots of ideas want to get into your mind. And if you've been properly educated, you're probably going to be resistant to crazy ideas. Or ideas, unless, of course, and I write about this in the book, unless you're in a susceptible place. If you're highly stressed, you're not getting proper nutrition or something like that, you're susceptible to getting a cold or some other kind of disease or virus. The same thing is true in religion. If you're under a lot of stress, that's when religions like to attack and get you. That's why we have hospitals. Hospitals are the best place to get a God virus. That's why there's chaplains that'll visit you every day, multiple times if you want to, because they're trying to infect you with the God virus. The best time to infect somebody is when they're young or when they're sick or when they're under high levels of stress. Those 3 conditions will really make you susceptible to almost any religion. If there's a lot of competition in an environment, then it's hard for a new religion to get started. And therein, I'm going to come back to Mormonism in just a second. One of the most successful religions in world history is Islam. And Islam got its start in an environment that was really fractured. And the Christianity, even though Christianity dominated most of the places that Islam had been in, it was a very fractured Christianity. And there was Zoroastrianism still in Persia. There was a lot of these little, even old religions were there. But Islam comes out and it's such a powerful God virus. It is able to sweep up literally across the entire planet practically in 400 years. Islam spread throughout the world much faster than Christianity did because it has had more efficient vectors. It used violence indiscriminately oftentimes. It had a very powerful message that picked up off the backs of Judaism and Christianity. So you had people who are already familiar with these other God viruses, and it just allowed them to jump on board and run with it. So, and we can see just in terms of where we are today on the globe, how Islam is the second biggest religion on the planet, and Christianity's dying back. Islam's still growing. It won't be another decade or two. Islam will actually be bigger than Christianity, because Christianity's lost its vectors. With the internet and with education, it's hard to penetrate a new ideology into something like that with all that competition going on. And therein lies Mormonism. Mormonism to me is like the Superman or the super vector or the super virus, because it started in an environment with 128 other religions. That's a huge amount of competition. And yet it came out victorious out of that time frame and was able to establish itself in an extremely competitive environment. And partly that's because it had really effective vectors. Clearly, Brigham Young was a very good vector. Joseph Smith was good as well, of course. But it also created a social structure. Remember, I'm an organizational psychologist. I love studying how social structures work and don't work. And Mormonism created a social structure that was incredibly resilient and powerful, and provided for a lot of the psychological needs of people on the frontier. The frontiers were dangerous. It was a difficult place. I'm from Kansas. I used to go out hunting in western Kansas, hunting pheasants when I was a kid. I grew up with a gun in my hand. And you go out there and find hundreds of old, dilapidated houses that were just gone. They were just falling down, or barns, or with. In other words, there were 1,000, maybe million people living in western Kansas that aren't there today. That's how hard it was in the West. And I'm just talking Kansas. It was just about as hard or harder in Utah. But if you have a really strong cooperative social structure that can feed you through a drought, or you can protect you if the Native Americans are trying to kill you, I mean, there's a lot of benefits for that kind of a structure in the United States West. And that is why they had to get out of Nauvoo, Illinois. They had to get out of Missouri. They had to get out to a place there wasn't any competition, because the Baptists and Methodists in Missouri were not happy with the way the Mormons were acting in Independence, Missouri, in Clay County. I know the history really well here.
You do know the history. I mean, even some of Joseph Smith's family joined the Methodists. You're right. So I think isolationism is a huge key to all of this. I agree.
It really is. Anyway, I could just ramble on here. I don't want to do that. I want to have a dialogue, I guess. Plus, I'll get hoarse yelling like this all the time.
No, but it makes perfect sense. I mean, that's exactly it. If you look at the remnants or the other branches of Mormonism that remained, in with other viruses, they did not have the success that, like we like to refer to, the Brighamite branch, where that vector, took his group and completely isolated it, where it could grow and grow, have thousands of children. And here we are today. I mean, that really explains why we're sitting here today.
Yeah, it really does. The Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the RLDS, which 20 years ago rebranded itself as the Community of Christ. A friend of mine, Mark, who's in marketing for years, told me long before that. He said, when an organization has to rebrand itself, it tells you it's not successful.
Well, that's very interesting, because mainstream Mormonism recently said, we are not Mormons. We are now the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's a huge rebrand. So
I was just about to go there, because the RLDS did that, and now the Mormons are doing it. Yeah, and I refuse to stop calling them Mormons. I don't give a shit.
So do we.
I agree. Yep, I say I am a Mormon.
The name of the book is Mormon. The Book of Mormon. How do you change that?
So Dr. Ray, let me ask you the next question here is, once people are infected, one thing that I liked about your book was that you then talked about, how do we stop that virus from growing? What's the solution for our nation, for our own kids? And I thought you had some brilliant ideas on that.
Well, I want to throw that question a little bit back to you, Landon, just just out of curiosity, what were some of the things that stood out to you, if I can put you on the spot, or
Sure.
Rebecca?
Yeah, no, that's a
Teaching-
great question since you're not infected anymore, Landon.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about the reasons that you're infected, from a child on, or perhaps you met missionaries at a vulnerable time when they seek you out and then it takes root. So what is it exactly like for you, Landon? You're right. Why are you not infected anymore?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm not infected, because you always feel that, oh, there's some remnant there.
Yeah,
but to me, the biggest one was, you said, if we focused on teaching science, and if we education is a big part, that the more educated you are, and you threw out some numbers from scientists, and you mentioned that like 90% of certain scientists are atheists. And yet, in the general population, it's much higher. And then you have to ask yourself, who's done more to improve the situation of humans in the world? Is it science, or is it religionists? If you get sick, are you going to go to a religionist, or are you going to go to a scientist, a doctor, or someone who has that? The science has really has improved. So you mentioned that science was one of the great ways to do that.
Right. And I think I say this late in the book. One way to inoculate your children is to take them to church.
That was the other one. Multiple churches, yes.
Yeah, but not one church.
That.
Yeah, because the more churches they go to, and the more you sit down after church, you sit down, go out to lunch and say, what do you think of this church? Here's some of their beliefs. What do you think of those beliefs? And then you go to a different church next week or next month, and you say, here's some of their beliefs. After about 6 churches, and let's get a good variety, ones that have some really different beliefs, then you're going to help the kids start thinking more critically about it. And you don't have to say, this church is right and this church is wrong, and this church is bad, or this church. You don't have to say any of that. All you have to do is say, here's what they believe. Here's what the last church we visited believed. How's that compare? You're giving them critical thinking skills without taking a side, so to speak. And I think it's important. And that's again, partly why I founded Recovering from Religion, because I saw atheists running around telling everybody how stupid they are for believing a religion. And I thought, well, that's like the worst thing you can do. Mm-hmm. Nobody is going to think they're stupid for believing their particular religion. So what you have to do is give people ways of thinking, new ways of thinking. And you can't go into it, I'm going to deconvert you from your stupid religion. It doesn't work that way. So in training our volunteers at Recovering from Religion, we train them very carefully. Your job is to ask questions. That's all. Ask questions. If they give you information or ask for help, then you can give them resources. You can point them in certain ways, but you are never, ever to try and deconvert them. We will even help you find another church if that's what you want. And we've taken many a person who was a Baptist saying, I want out of this thing, but I want to stay with God. So what's an option? And we'll say, well, there's the Quakers, there's the Unitarians, there's the Unity Church. We'll send you, go explore those, which is kind of an experiment of the same thing I just talked about. Go to lots of different churches. Mm-hmm. And what we see at Recovering from Religion is people oftentimes leave a high control fundamentalist religion, or they live, or like Mormonism, or just being a Baptist, and they go to something a little bit different. And they don't like that. And then they go to something a little bit more liberal. And they don't like that. And then they go to see a pagan. They go to a pagan ritual or a satanic temple group. And before you know it, they've gone to enough that they say, it's all bullshit. The light bulb comes on, but it wasn't me that told them that. It was they who figured it out. A wise mentor of mine years ago had told me that, this is, I think if I could, I'd get everybody in here to watch this down. People do not argue with their own data. People do not argue with their own data. So the job is help people develop and generate their own data. If they have only data from being a Baptist, that's what's going to happen. They're going to be a Baptist. But if they can generate data from Baptists and Lutherans and Buddhists and pagans, before you know it, they will have generated the data that it's all bullshit. That's what happens many times. People generate opposing data, or they create data that conflicts with the data they got. And so the cognitive dissonance they experience pushes them gently to another place. Where that place is not our responsibility. That's your responsibility, or the person, we're working with.
I like
so
your
that's-
story. How
We're
you
all
took
talking
your
now. Go ahead, Landon.
how you took your children to Temple Square for
Yeah.
exactly that purpose.
You're exactly right. That was a lot of fun. I still laugh. My daughter and son and I, we still have a laugh about that one because they couldn't believe it. We had flown out there and rented a car. We'd gone skiing for a few days, and then we ended up going to the temple. And I had spent hours in the car, on the airplane. I told them all about the Mormon temple, so they were really looking forward to this. And I said, and when we go there, because I'd already been there a couple times in my life, here's what we're going to do. And I had prepped them all. They were just astounded that was the way we were treated. And that poor girl, she didn't know what to do with herself. That's why she said, "Oh, come talk to Elder so and so that day." Yeah, I have Mormon stories. I didn't collect them intentionally. It just happened to me as I was going through life.
That's the same for all of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
So were you? So when you were in Temple Square, you asked too many questions, or what?
Oh, yeah.
Was...
Yeah. I asked too many questions, and I asked questions that demonstrated I knew Mormon history. I knew things about how many wives did Joseph Smith have. Yeah. Why did I don't remember what questions I know what I probably would ask, but I don't remember what I asked. Probably asked, why did Brigham Young have more wives than Joseph Smith had, or some stupid idea like that?
Question. That's great though. And then your children experienced, that and kind of locked it away. And I love that idea where you have to make someone, it has to originate in their own mind to be effective. You can't go right at somebody and say, for example, I think of saying to somebody, the Book of Mormon isn't true. Well, they're going to fight back on that with everything they have, because the virus is going to make them fight back. However, so Landon and I are doing a series on Mormonish where we have a scholar who comes on named Dr. John Lundwall. We don't say the Book of Mormon isn't true. What we do is we have this scholar talk about what Book of Mormon time was like in the Americas, where there's no metal, there's no writing, there's no, he doesn't say you guys are all wrong. He just shows them what does exist. And then in their own mind, they're like, well, wait a minute. If that's what was there, then it couldn't have been this. And that's way more powerful than going right at somebody and attacking them. But it also makes me realize, in terms of the virus again, recently, especially in the Mormon church, there's been a lot of instruction and talks about only trusted sources of information from us. Don't listen to someone who believes differently from you. Haven't you noticed, Landon, that they have really been pushing that, at least in my mind, a lot recently? Just completely tune out anything else that doesn't agree with what the virus has already told you. Do you find that, Landon?
Yeah, that's exactly what the church does. And you mentioned that in your book, that, that the church always says go to only trusted sources. Only take advice from believers, other believers, because they're exactly afraid of that you're going to be, infected, or you're going to see that. And I know from my personal experience, once I started to travel, I travel a lot for work, but I usually stayed local. But as I got higher up, I started going further and further. And now I go international. And when you go international and all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're going, well, these Buddhists have pretty good kids too, and they love their family too. Why do they need my church? They seem to be doing pretty good. They seem to be doing better than we are. Their kids behave, So.
No, you're not wrong though, Landon. And I, of course, was not traveling. I had kids at home, but I remember maybe like 15 years ago, I started watching a show called House Hunters International. It was on HGTV, and it was about people that were looking for new homes internationally. So it took you on these little journeys as they were house hunting to all these incredible countries. And I remember watching that, and I'd see these other places that were just, millions of people living in these cities. None of them are Mormons, or very few. They're all living their lives. And there are ways that your brain just expands. I mean, that sounds very simplistic, but it kind of just penetrated my brain going, oh my God, there are millions and millions and millions of people out there doing their own thing, doing their own lives. They've never even heard of Mormonism. Who am I? What am I a part of? You just have to take yourself out of it kind of, and then it takes off from there, I think.
hmm Cults cannot, and I do consider Mormonism a cult. I consider most religions cults actually, but high control groups have to maintain social isolation of their members, or bad ideas, quote, bad ideas will infect their brains and then may push out the Mormon ideas or the Catholic or whatever. And I think I would never attack directly. I would never attack a Mormon directly, or I would never attack a Jehovah's Witness directly. What I might do is take out some quotes, say, here are 5 different religions besides your. I would never talk about yours. I would say, here's a quote from the Scientology. They say, never read anything outside of Scientology. Here's a quote from Jehovah's Witnesses. They say, never read or look at anything on the internet that's not approved by the Jehovah's Witnesses. So, and you could go through a half a dozen of those and say, wonder, what do you think of the Scientologists forcing their people never to read something? What do you think of the Jehovah's Witnesses? And then leave it at there. I mean, leave it at that, because anybody who's exposed to that, sooner or later, that little crack. And I want to give you a great metaphor. It's a book written 40, 50 years ago. I do not recommend the book, so don't get me wrong here.
We won't include it in the show notes.
No, don't. You could, but it's not that the book's that bad. It's very dated. However, the title of the book alone is worth the book. That's why I'm talking about it. The book is called The Crack in the Cosmic Egg. And his thesis is, if you're raised in a bubble, if you're raised inside of an egg, Mormonism, and someday somebody comes along and says, oh my gosh, Scientology says the same thing. Don't read anything outside of Scientology. Oh, Joe doesn't say the same thing. I wonder what that's all about. A little crack forms in that cosmic egg. And then sooner or later, you open the crack and you step out as you travel to Thailand, or you travel to England. Traveling internationally does it a lot of times. And you realize there's a much bigger cosmic egg out there. You've got to break that cosmic egg that you've been raised in and that protects you. And the only way to do that is to get information from outside that egg. And that's why Mormons want to protect you. That's why Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientologists, even Catholics. I mean, for centuries, Catholics had the prohibited book list, 500 books that you can't read. Now it'd be 500 books a year that you can't read. If they still were doing that. And therein lies the reason right now why there's such a controversy around censoring books in libraries and schools. Mm-hmm. Because Christianity is losing its hold on the information war side. And so they've got to stop kids from reading books that might undermine the Christian message. Now, I'm telling you, I read Catch-22, Joseph's Heller, and I read, oh gosh, I can name a bunch. I read all of them. If you told me not to read it, I'd be reading it. But they weren't censored in when I was in high school. Right. They weren't censored when I was in junior high. And now the books that I was reading are now being censored. I think, wait a minute. Yeah. Kurt Vonnegut's being censored? I was reading Kurt Vonnegut 30 years ago, and nobody was saying he should be censored then. What has changed? And therein, I want to move our discussion a little bit in a new direction. What has changed is the Christian nationalist God virus taking over our country, or is trying to take over our country. And that leads us back to where we started, chapter 3 of the book, when I talk about the civil religion. We now have a very uncivil religion that is trying to infect everybody with their version of Christianity. And that version includes prohibition on abortion, prohibition on reading books outside, prohibition on birth control, prohibition on women having rights. There's even some places saying women should not have the vote anymore. I've seen a woman she's a politician making an argument that women probably should have never been given the vote. Okay, that is, in the Christian nationalism it's another God virus. And sometimes God viruses can be complementary. They're not identical, but they can be complementary. And therein means you could have two different viruses. And there's actually examples in biology where viruses cooperate. There is a virus. In fact, we now have a thing in biology, if you got biologists listening to it, called CRISPR. It's a gene editing system that was invented based upon research that comes out of bacteria. And part of that was, how do bacteria edit their own genes? And they found in this research 20 years ago that there's a little virus that get in bacteria that cannot replicate unless another virus gets into that bacteria. And the two viruses together cooperate to do their dirty deeds or whatever they're going to do inside the bacteria. Well, the same thing appears to be happening now in American culture. Is we have this huge influence of Baptist fundamentalists, evangelical purity culture. All those things are like a package, if you will, DNA. It's the DNA that gives you blue eye color, okay? But we've got a DNA here of evangelical Christianity. And then that evangelical Christianity, as I say in the chapter 3, is that every religion wants to grab control of the political system. If it can grab control of the political system, it has it made in the shade. And the evidence for that is, look, culture and religion are not identical. They're two different components. But sometimes if culture can dominate so much that it takes over religion, that it takes over the culture, then you get Saudi Arabia. Then you get Iran. Then you get Afghanistan. Those are countries where the culture and the religion are the same thing. You can't separate the two. And that's what Christianity tried to do too. For 1,000 years, Christianity dominated the culture from, about 500 or 600 AD until Martin Luther came along in 512, I believe it was. So, 900 years, 1512. Catholicism and culture were the same thing until Martin Luther came along and started splitting them apart. And slowly but surely, Lutheranism, then Calvinism, then Episcopalianism, Protestantism, Puritanism, all these little movements started just splitting and splitting and splitting. So you no longer could have complete dominance of the culture by one religion. Yet religion still wants to do it. Look what Calvinism tried to do in Switzerland. Calvinism tried to take it all over. I mean, thousands of people were murdered because they wouldn't leave Catholicism and join John Calvin. And you see the same thing in England with the English Civil War in the 1640s and 50s. The English, hundreds of thousands of people died. And before that, in the 30 Years' War, it was a struggle between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. But what it was really doing is, which religion is going to dominate the culture? That's what the war was all about. And that is what we're seeing today in Christian nationalism. It's a war between the culture and Christian nationalism, because Christian nationalism wants to marry itself, infect as a parasite into our culture. And that's why I wrote chapter 3, because you'll notice that as you read earlier, Rebecca, the subtitle of the book is How Religion Infects Our Lives and Culture. And to me, that's as important as the psychology. The political side is as important as the psychology and vice versa. So we've talked a lot about the psychology side, and that's why I wanted to shift into the political side, because we're seeing it happening all around. Mm-hmm. Look at all the religious symbolism on January 6th. This is January 6th. 3 years ago, a religion tried to kill people and did succeed in killing some people in our nation's capital. Now, you cannot attack the religion. So this religion is so powerful that today, one of the two major parties denies there was ever an attack on the Capitol, denies it to its very bones that there was a problem. Major candidates still won't attack the religion because it's a civil war that you can't attack a religion or you will get this backlash. Now, the Democrats can because they're not a part of that Christian nationalism, but the Republican Party has. Now, I'm not being political. I'm giving you an analysis that I wrote 15 years ago that fits perfectly today. I could have wrote this yesterday. Before we started the show, I could have wrote this yesterday, and it would be just as irrelevant. Because all I explained was, here's what religion's getting ready to do to us. And the problem is, what I predicted wasn't nearly as bad as how it turned out. It is much worse than I predicted in the book. I mean, you read the book, you know what I say. I oftentimes tell people I'm a prophet. I'm just a bad prophet.
I think you're a prophet. No, and I look back at Mormon history, and I think that is why they were run out everywhere they went. They tried to, take over politically. They tried to take over the culture. They tried to completely have total theocratic dominance, and the other people are not going to have it. You need to get out of town. But that is exactly what they were trying to do.
And they still do in Utah.
And they still do.
In Utah, you try to change the political structure, you cannot. Mormonism is the culture of Utah, and trying to make a change is very, very difficult to make anything politically changed here.
Yeah, so Mormonism is a perfect example of everything I write in chapter 3. And that's why I have so many examples throughout the book on Mormons, because you guys are like the poster child for what I'm talking about.
Yeah, you're just complimenting us right and left, aren't you?
Well, I'm not sure I'd call it a compliment, but
yeah,
okay.
no, I know.
The stories. Go ahead.
I love that chapter 3. That was probably the one I kept calling Rebecca and saying, listen to this, this culture and this religion, and this is what's happening. I'm going, yes, this is the answer I've been looking for. So
yeah, and the funny thing is some of the people I name in that chapter in the book are still around. They're still doing their stuff. A number of them have died, like Pat Robertson. He's long in Liberty University. Jerry Falwell, he's died too. But those were the guys that were pushing this Christian nationalist idea way back then. The whole notion of we are a Christian nation comes from that root, and of course is Christian nationalism.
We're actually going to be doing an episode on that here in the very near future on the founding fathers and were they finding this country as a Christian nation. And I actually was highlighting quotes all over the place in your book to put for that episode because you were showing that. Yeah, you were showing, no, this isn't what they said. They never intended it to be a Christian nation. They did the exact opposite. They were trying to make sure it wasn't taken over by any one religion.
Well, and what people don't know, if you haven't studied it, I could say, you need to study American history. I would agree with that. But there's one piece that we do not teach our kids and that nobody really knows about. And that's the history that happened before American history. There were two enormous events that impacted the founding fathers of the United States. The first event was the 30 Years' War that took place in the late 1600s, where the death toll during the 30 Years' War in Europe was proportionally bigger than the death toll of World War I. It was enormous. 23 million people probably died during that 30 years. And it was simply a war between Catholicism and the various factions of Protestantism, which included Calvinism and Lutheranism and what later became Presbyterianism, a lot of those groups. And right in the middle of all these are the early Anabaptists, the Amish, and in England, the Quakers. So there are the Hutterites, the Hussites. There's a whole lot of these groups that were all there. And it was a result of, trying to take over a culture. Millions of people died. Now move over to England just about 30 years, 40 years later. And England has, and many, many Americans do not know that England had a horrible civil war. Did you know England had a civil war?
With Cromwell, right? Cromwell.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You get
Protestants and the Catholics. Yeah.
You get extra credit there, Landon.
But that's about all I know. I don't know the
brilliant.
specifics of it. Yeah.
Well, from 1648 until about 1654, they had a horrible civil war. Again, millions of people died in this war, and it was the Protestants against the Catholics, but it was also other subgroups like the Presbyterians that would have been coming out of Scotland. Excuse me. So it was a war that just devastated England and ended up the King Charles I got his head chopped off. First time any commoners had ever chopped the head off of any king in the history of Europe, pretty much. So it was a major, major event. You don't want to run chopping heads off of kings. And it was all over religion, primarily over religion. So I want your listeners to know that the people who wrote our Constitution, Benjamin Franklin, Madison, those people were extremely familiar with English history. They were extremely familiar with the 30 Years' War in Europe. What they wanted in our Constitution was something that would not allow that kind of religious strife to come to our continent, to these shores. They even say, we don't want this on our shores, because it is a horrible thing for millions of people to die over which interpretation of the Bible is correct or not. And that is important when you do your little thing, your episode. I almost could say you can't do an episode on the Founding Fathers unless you educate people about the English Civil War. And you can't understand the English Civil War if you don't understand the European 30 Years' War. So I'm just saying that's where you can trace a straight line from James Madison clear back to Martin Luther and what's going on there. Anyway, that's my lecture
it's really
on
important. No, I'm so glad you said all that. It is so important to understand. And that's why we've been thinking more and more about doing these kinds of episodes, because we do see this Christian nationalism and what we like to call Mormon Christian nationalism creeping in. I mean, we've noticed Mormonism aligning itself with the Christian right so much, even to the point where adopting like the symbol of the cross. Mormons didn't do that. I mean, that was something you didn't do. You didn't wear a cross. You didn't worship a cross, and now that's creeping in as there seems to be this alliance for what purpose? I'm not exactly sure, but it's definitely changed.
No. I can tell you exactly sure. Because
good.
Here's the exactly sure. How does a virus survive? How does the COVID virus survive today? It survives today because it's mutated, and it keeps mutating so that we will always have the COVID virus. Once it is here, it's going to be here forever, probably, because it has effective ways of mutating and infecting new people. Well, that's what's happening in any religion. Religions are God viruses. They have to mutate. If a religion doesn't mutate, it dies. That's why those 125 other religions in upstate New York no longer exist, because they didn't mutate. Mormonism, however, did mutate. Mormonism and there's some organisms can mutate very effectively and efficiently. Some viruses are really good at mutating, others are not. The ones that are good at mutating are going to find ways to survive. Mormonism is a organization that has a structure that allows for efficient mutation. Catholicism, on the other hand, is encumbered and very inefficient. It does not mutate very easily. And so you get crazy things like the Pope this week saying, priests can bless gay marriages, but they can't look like marriages. Yeah. Or, you get popes saying, Galileo was right back in 1525 or whatever it was, and here it is 1989. That's the kind of slow mutation of the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church, in places that have high levels of education and high levels of internet penetration, is dying. Where is the Catholic Church thriving? It's thriving in Africa. Catholic Church is dying.
Mormonism too, Africa.
Yeah. So Mormonism is thriving in places, and Catholicism thriving in places where the resistance is low. There's not a lot of competition in the environment with other ideologies. But here it's dying. In Europe, it's dead. I mean, even Italy is a minority of Catholics. Here's a funny thing. I went to Ireland about 12 years ago. I went on a book tour there. I was speaking on the God virus. That's what I was doing.
Of course.
And I was touring around the country, and it's really fun. I do a little research while I'm touring around the country. And one of the people tells me about the Catholic Church in Ireland, and he says it's dying. In fact, it's so dead that they maybe not long after that, they passed their legalized abortion constitutional amendment, passed it with easily. And this guy was telling me, well, there used to be 3 parishes here in my little area of Ireland, and each parish had 2 priests. Now there's 1 parish. There's 3 parishes, but there's only 1 priest. And the priest has to rotate around. So there was 6 priests before, now there's only 1. Mm-hmm. And he says, and the 1 priest is from Nigeria.
Not even
Isn't that interesting?
Irish. Wow.
That is
You know,
very,
it's
so
interesting what you just said, though, that really said, because Mormonism should not be mutating because they teach that there was a restoration and all things were
yes,
restored and that God came back and restored his church. And now, in order to survive, it has to mutate. And now they've changed and they're now calling it an ongoing restoration. So
yes.
that really makes sense. They're starting to say, well, everything wasn't restored. And why wasn't everything restored? Because we have to mutate
We have to
in order to
mutate quickly.
survive. And we can't mutate unless we tell you that everything wasn't restored. We still have to keep making changes.
And you've got this great approach to evolution, because it's all it is, evolution, and that is following a living prophet.
Mhm.
You've got a person who can change his mind anytime he wants, or a group that can change their minds.
Mhm.
Now, I'm not saying it's efficient now. It was efficient in the past. I think you guys have you've lost a lot of ground. I mean, in fact, just this week, there's a new survey came out that's found that only 42% of people in
Yeah.
Utah are active Mormons. So
Mhm.
you are losing fast, because that's changed like 10% just in the last 10 years or so. It's the same across the United States, but Utah, well, you know, and besides that, Utah is one of the two highest states for porn consumption. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
I think,
the reason I brought that up is because I think one of the reasons people are leaving is because the church is mutating. And
Right.
those of us that
Yeah.
were in, we said, wait, you told us these were solid truths, solid doctrines that God gave them to us and they cannot change. And now here you are changing them. And Russell M. Nelson is changing everything, and he's
Mhm.
changing it very quickly. And you're going, well, why, as soon as this guy took over, did God all of a sudden start changing his
Yeah.
mind about everything? And people are going, this seems to not be right. And so the church is trying to do the mutation thing, but in a way it's backfiring on them, because forever they taught us that the church can't change, that God's unchanging. And so I think it's kind of biting them a bit.
No, I agree. And
hell
think
yeah.
about, they even came out in a conference talk within the last year where they said, unlike vintage comic books or classic cars, the words of old prophets don't age well. So basically, don't listen to anything else except for what is being said right now. But then a thinking person is going to go, well, wait, this prophet is going to not be here for long. So why listen now when probably next month his words are irrelevant? But that makes so much sense when you put it in terms of a mutation, that
Yeah.
change has to be constant. And I agree with Landon. People like my parents who live in a 1980s Mormon church, in their mind, you know, if they were to actually
Yeah.
attend church, because, you know, they're in assisted living, they wouldn't recognize what their church was. And probably they might get censured for things that they're saying that were just fine to say in 1980, but not now. So what an interesting concept. This is fascinating.
It really is. If you want to know how fast religion is going to mutate, look at their bank account. Look at their membership. Those two will tell you if the bank accounts are healthy and not going down, and if the membership is not going down, they're not going to mutate. Churches only mutate when they have to. And you guys, you can see it. Whether it's the
Mormonism is unique because they have the healthiest bank account in the world.
They do, yeah.
But their membership is going down.
Yep.
Well, you can't, you have to have one or the other has to be true. If you look at the Baptists right now, Baptists have lost several 100,000 members over the last few years. They're going down rapidly. And you'll see Baptists doing all sorts of things to try and mutate. Some of the most obvious mutations that happened back in the late 90s. And that's when they started bringing in rock bands and trying to really upgrade their cultural experience to attract more people. And they started changing the music. They started really getting away from the hymn book. And they're singing songs. There are people that are 30 years old now that don't have a clue about the hymns I sang when I was 30 years old. That's how fast that. And yet some of those hymns had been around for 200 years and now they're gone. They're just gone. I've been in churches where you could tell the hymnals had not been pulled out of the seat in front of you in years. They were dusty. They just obviously weren't singing out of them.
And that's so interesting you would mention music, because think about this, Landon. The Mormon church is doing the same thing.
Mhm.
There's this new kind of Christian rock that the kids really like.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
there have been youth events, big events in Salt Lake, where when you see video, you can't tell the difference between a regular evangelical kind of the kids are doing this. That did not happen when Landon and I were kids. It's very
Yeah.
different now. It's moving very quickly. And when you ask younger Mormons about that, they're like, "Oh, it's always been this way." And people
Yeah.
Landon and my age are like, "No, this is radically different, radically than how we grew up." It's what an interesting way to frame it all in. This is just so interesting.
I think if you could do it historically, if we could actually go back and do very precise research, you can tell how fast a church is mutating by the music. Music is probably the top indicator of stagnation or mutation.
Mhm.
And so if all we're seeing is the Mormon church 20 years behind
Yeah.
many of the Protestant churches.
Which
Of course,
it
there's lots of
typically is, because
Yeah,
we have a
it's always-
prophet who sees into the future, so he's always 20 years behind.
yeah, there you go.
Well, and even musical instruments that are allowed in the Mormon church up until just last year, only stringed instruments and like a piano. You could not have drums, you could not have brass, you couldn't have anything electric. And now they're starting to morph that even. And I think it's because they're becoming more international. And in other areas, those instruments, maybe they're all you have or they're more accepted. But yeah, everything is changing. Everything that was set in stone is now set in sand, I feel, with this ongoing restoration.
If you look at when if you got a hymnal from a Protestant church and you went back 300 or 400 years, you just did a survey, the places where there was the most tumult and mutation is where the most new hymns were being created, new music to fit that new situation. And that's what we're seeing right now with these rock bands. And that's been going on since the 90s. I've watched it myself. There's another one, and I think, I don't read my own book every day. I don't remember, but I think there was one place that I talk about this. There's a phenomena that started in early 90s, if I recall, in the way that Protestants pray, especially the more conservative Protestants. And I noticed this, thought that's really weird. I've never seen that before. But I write about it in the book because over the years I saw it mutate. And it's this. When I was growing up, you just stood up and you prayed, "Dear Lord, thank you for this meal," and all that. But that's not what was happening in the 90s, and it continues to this day. The new prayer methodology is this: "Dear Lord, we just ask that you give us this meal. We just ask. We just ask. So the word "just" is injected into the prayer over and over and over again. And what's the function of that? I thought to myself, and then I realized I've had extensive hypnosis training and hypnotic induction, and I've even gone through hypnotic induction many times in my life. I find it very helpful to me, I did at that time anyway. But what I realized, it's a hypnotic induction technique. It's a way to get people to trigger people to go into an altered state of consciousness. The words, if you listen to the words, you read, if you just transcribe what that person said, it's pretty much meaningless. There's no content there, but there's all these trigger words that take you into a different state of receptivity to a message. I mean, the message will get to you sooner or later. But anyway, that's a mutation that came about in the way we pray. So we've talked about music, we talked about prayer. We could also talk about the way sermons are delivered, or messages, or literature. I mean,
yeah, I was going to mention sermons. No, especially there's a Mormon cadence in talks and things like that, like in conference. I think, "Hi, dear brothers and sisters. Well, no, and then na. And it is, you're just, the voices, there's just, and everyone kind of jokes about it. Like, do they learn to talk like that but it's not, it's this effect where you become very receptive. Your brain just kind of, I don't know, turns into mush maybe. I'm not sure. But yeah, when you look at it like that, you can see all these tactics. There was one thing that I thought was really interesting when you talked about changing and this ongoing progression, there's an element of a virus that needs to remain fundamental to protect, which I think we're really seeing in Mormonism. Wouldn't you agree, Landon, right now? There are so many changes that there is a growing faction that insists on remaining very fundamental and moving that other direction. And then there's this very progressive side of Mormonism. And we've podcasted about this before, where we see these two sides. No one in the middle in the church is censoring either side. They're just kind of letting them both happen because they're still in the church. But eventually, what's going to happen? I mean, this fundamentalism is really growing.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the book, as you note, I write about fundamentalism, and fundamentalism in any religion are the shock troops of that religion. That's why you see ISIS in Islam. ISIS are the shock troops. They are there to make sure the religion stays pure. And they're the only ones that know what God really wanted. And that's true whether you're a fundamentalist Baptist or a fundamentalist Jehovah's Witness. Every church seems to go that direction of having the shock troops there, and they're there to preserve. When people tell me that, well, liberal religions are fine, I say, yeah, but there's a direct line across the religious divide over to the fundamentalists. And the fundamentalists are the ones that are doing the harm to our world today. And they're supported by the liberals that belong to that church. You wouldn't have the fundamentalists if you didn't have the liberals. They're two sides of the same coin. People don't like to hear that, but without fundamentalism, and remember, every religion started off as a fundamentalist cult. Every one of them does. All they're doing, and how many times do you hear a religion say, we're going back to the Bible. We're going back to the original intent of Jesus. We're going to go back to the restored church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's all that is. That all it is saying we have the right words of God. We know what God wants. And every church does it. You're witnessing it in Mormonism, but it's what we see in Christian nationalism is just it's just fundamentalism. We don't call it that, but it's got all the fundamentalists are almost always violent, or they use violent language, and which could turn to violence. And I make a note in my in the book how many. Well, no, I make it in my talk. I give of course talks on God virus, and I show photographs of all these different fundamentalist ministers like Pat Robertson or well, you know, there's a bunch of them out there. And if you listen to even 10 seconds of their sermon, you get this incredible sense of anger in their voice. And if you listen to some of the words, their words are full of violence. And you know, we're soldiers for God. We're going to strike down our enemies. You know, we're out here marching against. The words of violence are a component of fundamentalism. I don't know if well, I do know in the fundamentalist church, there's actual violence.
Yeah. Well, we just had a talk recently, last 5 years, when Holland got up and talked about, I want to see a little bit more musket fire and a little bit more, what was it? And this was talking about LGBTQ and stuff, that we need a little more musket fire. And that really got people going, wait a minute, what are you talking? This could incite violence, you know? Yeah, exactly. And so you see this incitement to violence is very common among fundamentalists, whether it's an ISIS, a fundamentalist Buddhists are out there shooting people in Sri Lanka. I mean, it's not unique to Islam or Christianity. It's in almost any religion. So that's why I paid attention in the book to the notion that fundamentalism are the shock troops of any religion. If the religion is threatened, if your body is threatened by a virus, there are shock troops in your body called T cells, I believe. I'm not a biologist, but that are going to get out there and take the brunt of the attack. They're the first responders of your body to a biological attack against you from a fungus or a virus or a parasite. Well, the religions have the same thing. The fundamentalists are the shock troops that get out there and protect the fundamentals of that religion, which were in fact
what the religion believed 100 years ago.
Right.
Those fundamentalists are trying to recreate what was going on in 1890 or even earlier, because that was before polygamy was outlawed. And it's true of Baptist. It's true of the church I was raised in. Was Independent Christian Church, and their only claim to fame was where the Bible speaks, we speak. Where the Bible's silent, we're silent. We go back to the original Christian church. Oh, and they were really proud of that. Oh, and we dunk people. You know, if you're not dunked, you're not going to heaven. And those Mormons don't dunk right, so they're not going to heaven either. I'm just telling you what my grandma taught me.
I believe it. No, everyone goes back to the church Christ established. Yet, did Christ really establish a church? I mean, that's the funniest part about it.
Yeah, right. No, Paul did, not Christ.
Yeah, exactly.
It should be called Paulism.
It should be called Paulism. Yeah, we were just talking about that today, weren't we, Landon? And again, most people are not familiar with history. They just don't understand. It's so
or history or the Bible or how it was created. And Mormons should not be called Mormons. They should be called Youngites.
Brighamite. We call Brighamites.
That's what
But they don't like to hear that. They don't like to hear Brighamite. They also they're not aware, and they certainly don't like to hear there are other branches of the church with just as legitimate claims on, a priesthood authority as, Brighamites. There are many others. We attended a Bicker Tonight church, which was Cindy Rigdon when we were in Florida. We were in Florida last month, and there they are, and they believe that they are the true Mormons, and they believe all other Mormons will eventually realize it and that they'll join together. They're reading the Book of Mormon. They're singing hymns. I mean, they are just as legitimate. But Mormons in Utah do not want to hear that. They can't imagine that. They just don't understand the history.
Different virus. Yep.
It's a different virus.
It's a mutated virus.
Yes.
And here's the deal. Religions, we make fun of how that happens because Mormons, of course, have split off into many different subgroups. Right. Baptists are famous for splitting off into subgroups. But that is functional. Think about it. How many times did the COVID virus mutate? The COVID viruses have mutated millions of times in the last 3 or 4 years. And out of those millions of mutations, there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that are incredibly successful, and they move on, the rest die. Well, that's what's happening in religion. Mormons are splitting off into many different groups with the potential that one of those will regain the success it needs to propagate, and it'll take off again. If you go back and look at it this way, Judaism was a religion that started splitting off during the time about the 1st century into the pre-AD, BC and AD. For about that 200-year time period, there were all sorts of Jewish splinters. The Essenes are famous from the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were a split off of Judaism. So you got all these split offs. And one day, a split off occurs that gains success. It's the COVID that works, and it's called Christianity. But it goes for about 200 years, and it starts splitting and splitting and splitting until there's 2 huge splits in the Christian church in 325, the Arian split and what we now know as the Proto-Catholic split. And Constantine says, hey, stop fighting. We're going to get this settled here. And Catholics win and the Arians get murdered. That's basically the way it works. And then it went for another 900 years until Luther comes along, and look at all these little splits, and they start splitting all over the place. The Calvinism, Lutheranism, Anabaptists, all these splits, and then one will grab a hold and be successful in a given area, like in England, or a given area like Switzerland, and then you've got the whole thing starts all over again. It is so damn biological. I've had people accuse me of using the God virus too much. You use that word too much. I think, well, okay, help me stop, because there's no other way that works. Unless I call it the God parasite, of course. I could do that. I think that would turn more people off than the God virus does.
No, and once you understand that concept, I mean, even on a high level, you just start seeing everything that's happening from that point of view, and you can put it in that frame, and you're just like, that makes sense now. I mean, even right now in our area where we live in Mormonism, there are splits. I would say like Denver Snuffer, very successful split, a Phil Davis. There are people that and they all say, my church is not doing what it's supposed to do. It's lost its way. I need to take it a different direction. So it's
Right.
really fascinating to watch because, like you said, it's just biological. It's what's going to happen.
Yep. And almost all of them, I'll say almost all of them, but almost could say every one of them is started by a charismatic person.
Yes, absolutely.
That really is starting a subcult, what it amounts to. And, every religion starts off as a cult. And today we have the Millerites, or in the 1840s, there were the Millerites. From the Millerites, we get Seventh-day Adventists, we get Jehovah's Witnesses, we get a bunch of Pentecostals. So you can see just from one the Millerites really spawned a whole lot of other things in that way. So there's one thing we haven't talked about, and I just want to make sure we get to this, and that is compassion. I use that at the very end, the last chapter. I said, we need to have compassion for people who've been infected because they didn't ask to be infected. They were oftentimes infected by their parents, or they were infected by their culture, or they were infected when they were under dire straits and sick or illness or poverty. There's reasons why people get infected. But we need to stop doing this approach of you're stupid because you believe this, and realize that we too believe this at one point in time. Are we stupid? We're not stupid. And how would we feel if somebody approached us in that way back when we were religious? So I have an argument in the last chapter to say we need to approach people with compassion, realize that if they had a cold, if they had cancer, if they had a serious illness, we would come to them with compassion. We wouldn't expect them to have their wits about them. We wouldn't expect them to be as logical or as able to navigate in their world if they're sick. And we would help them. And that's what I wanted people to leave the book with a new conceptual framework, individually, psychologically, and politically. But I also want them to do that with compassion, so that when you interact with religious people, have that compassion in your mind that I'm not here to challenge them. That would be the worst thing I could do. I'm here to ask questions that might be helpful, but never to argue. Do not argue with someone who's infected. Okay, I'll say it never works. People arguing, oh yeah, I know it worked one time. Okay, it worked one time out of 1,000 times. How many times did you push people back into their religion with that technique versus how many times did you actually help them get out of religion? So that's really my case, is if you truly want to help people, there's a way to do it. But the problem is it's slow, it's not fast, and it doesn't get you results overnight. So stop trying to push people out of their religion. Start trying to show people life after religion. Just be you. Be who you are. And so I could go on and on about that, but that's why I wrote that last chapter.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful part of it. And that is because the people that we are concerned about that are still in religions, they're our parents, they're our kids, they're our siblings, they're the people that we love. And you're right. If you go right at somebody, it doesn't do any good and it just drives a wedge. You need to focus on what do you have in common? What are your similarities, not your differences? Those may be vast sometimes, but there are areas of similarities. And then you just work together as human beings. And who knows what'll happen, right? The future is the future and you don't know, but we have to all love each other. That's a beautiful part of the book.
I will say you're probably going to change far more people's minds with the compassionate technique than you ever will with the angry I call it the angry atheist technique. And I'm not condemning that. People go through the phase, I was cheated, I didn't get a college degree, I didn't, this or that because of my religion. I understand the anger. I'm not condemning people for feeling that anger. What I am saying is let's get over the anger so we don't hurt other people. We don't cause more problems on the earth. We don't cause fewer problems. Yep. And by being compassionate, it also says I have to get control of my own emotions. I have to get control of my own thought processes before I can help anybody else. What is that old saying? Put the mask on yourself before you put it on. Help someone. Yeah, oxygen mask. So put the mask on yourself. that's what I don't quote Jesus very often, but that's kind of what he was saying when you say get the log out of your own eye before you try to help get the mote out of somebody else's. He was saying put the oxygen mask on yourself and then you can help somebody else. And I'll tell you this, and this is my plug for Recover from Religion. We have over 400 volunteers in every time zone on the planet. And we train our volunteers very carefully to use the techniques that we've been kind of talking about here today. And the techniques include being compassionate, asking good questions, don't try to convert or deconvert somebody. And, we help most of our volunteers tell us that the training they got helped them in their personal life with their family far more than actually volunteering for us. We have people who came through our training and never volunteered. They said, well, I don't want to do that. I don't have the time or whatever. But it did help me with my mother-in-law, or now I have a good relationship with my family because I stopped arguing with them. I just love them. I just hug them. I just tell them how wonderful they are with or without Jesus. It's just we're only get one life here. Let's live it as well as we can, and let's show people what a good life looks like.
I love that. And I did want to end with you talking a little bit more about recovering from religion. Tell people the process, tell people exactly what it is. You mentioned your volunteers. So I think it's important to let people know, how they can find you. When, give us a scenario where somebody would reach out and contact you and what could they expect? Because it's incredible the work that you're doing. And I would love for more people all over the globe know, but I think maybe in Mormonism, people don't know, and they're always looking for some kind of help when they leave and have that, dark night of the soul. Where do they go? And you and your organization are a great resource.
Well, I realized in my psychological practice how long it takes for people to get over grief and loss issues. And I also realized that there's a lot of grief and loss going on with people when they leave religion. It's almost like getting divorced. Mm-hmm. You thought you had something and now you don't anymore. We get lots of people calling us and chatting in with us. You can literally get online, go to recoverfromreligion.org, and there's a chat button. You just hit that button, and one of our volunteers will answer that. Now, we are a volunteer organization. We don't pay anybody. So if you don't get somebody responding, it's because they're asleep or something, So try again. I guarantee somebody will answer. It may not be your first time. And if you don't want to chat, you can always, there's a phone number on there. It's 1-844-I-DOUBT-IT. Is the number 1-844-I-DOUBT-IT if you're in the United States. And we have phone numbers directly from all sorts of countries. And you can dial us right on the, you can do a web call. And our volunteers will take your phone call and they will talk to you. And they're trained to do exactly what we've talked about here. If you're interested in, if you're out and you feel like you've got some extra time and energy, we're always looking for volunteers. And we need volunteers in a wide range of areas. We've got volunteers that answer that chat line and the phone line. We've got volunteers that run support groups. We have over 36 support groups in 5 different countries around the planet. And these support groups that actually sit down in a coffee shop and talk to each other face to face. Many of them also are virtual groups that meet like us right now. We have several groups that will have 20 people on a call like this talking about religious recovery issues. And you're welcome. Anybody listening here today is welcome. It doesn't cost a thing. We charge nothing for any of our services. Our donors make this possible. We don't charge you 10% of your income. Or anything like that. You just come to us and we accept anybody, even if you're still religious, we don't care. We're here to help you deal with whatever. And we have this enormous library of vetted materials that we guarantee are secular and they're not going to send you back to church or Jesus, and they'll help you deal with the psychological consequences. If you need actual professional psychological help, you can go to one of our other programs called the Secular Therapy Project, and you can register as a client literally from anywhere on the planet. And you can do a search, kind of like we actually modeled it after the online dating sites.
Match with your therapist.
You swipe left or right.
Yeah, it's almost like that because, the reason those dating sites keep people's privacy. They protect people's privacy, on both sides. And that's important. If you're a therapist in Lubbock, Texas, where everybody's a Baptist, you cannot advertise that I'm secular. So it is really hard to find a therapist that won't put Jesus or doesn't have a Bible on their shelf or a cross around their neck. If you want true evidence-based secular therapy, come to us, because we've vetted these therapists. We have therapists in Lubbock, Texas, but they can't advertise. If they advertised, no judge would send anybody to, no hospital would send anybody, no minister would send anybody to them. They'd lose their practice. So they have to remain confidential. And then, of course, clients oftentimes are leaving their religion, and they have to remain confidential too. Now, our therapists can deal with any psychological issues. We're not just focused on religions, but all we're saying is you can come to our therapist for any problem you've got in terms of mental health, and they can help you, and they will not pray with you. They won't tell you to go back to church.
That's their slogan. No, this is such an important part of what recovering from religion does, because we heard this especially in Mormonism all the time. Oh, I tried to go see a therapist. I didn't understand that they were also LDS, and they're just going to tell me to try to, you're sinning or you're praying. So your organization vets therapists, they apply to you to become one of their therapists, but they have to be vetted by you, and you turn people away if you sense that they cannot be a secular therapist. And so if anyone is looking for a secular therapist, you can check out this list and then make that arrangement, between yourself and the therapist. But it's important, because sometimes people go through session after session until they get to the point where their therapist says, if you would just maybe invite Jesus. And then you're like,
I wasted all that time and dollars.
I know. So that's a really important part. But then you also just mentioned, in your coaching, or if somebody feels like I still want to be part of a religion or a faith tradition, that's okay too. People are on a journey. It's not like you have to just drop it all if that's not for you right at that time.
And our volunteers are trained to join you in your journey, join you where you're at. You don't go where we think you should go. You go where you need to go. And that's so important in any human. Every human has the right to their own journey, and that's our attitude. I love our volunteers. I can't say enough about them. If you want to volunteer, go to recoveryfromreligion.org and hit the volunteer button. You'll go through a process. You have to fill out some paperwork. You'll have to go through an interview. If you get through the interview, which hopefully you will, then you go through one-on-one training. You go through online training. You do about 4 hours worth of your own training, and then you go on to one-on-one training. We also have a thing we don't talk about a lot because it's very private, and that is a Slack channel. I won't go into details.
Okay.
But we have subgroups like ex-Mormons, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and I know those groups are out in other places, but you can come into us and you'll be in a moderated channel where you can talk about, I'm LGBTQ, I'm in Mormonism, or I'm getting divorced from a spouse who's also religious. And we got about 30 different subcategories that you can join, but you have to come to you have to come and chat with us first, because we vet you. You have to be older than 16. And that's about the main vetting process. And then you say, hey, I'd like to join your chat groups, and we'll get you in, and you can talk to other people who are going exactly the same thing you are. And we've got people at who want to talk about military issues in the religious issues in the military, for example, or we got an all women's group, we got an all men's group, and these are groups that are dealing with religious issues related to your sexuality as a man or as a woman. And we got LGBTQ. I mean, we got all sorts of groups.
You have everything.
And there's I will say this, there's nowhere else on the planet you're going to find this kind of service.
Yeah.
Just isn't.
That's probably true, especially vetted like you do, and everybody's there for a purpose of healing and moving on. And like you say, finding their journey. So no, I hope everybody will take a look at the website, recoveringfromreligion.org. There's so many things on there that it has to offer. And I don't think a lot of Mormons are really aware of that. We're aware maybe of the Mormon resources, Thrive or Ex-Mormon Reddit or and Mormon Stories, Mormonism Live, all the different podcasts, but this is something that's even bigger than all of those. So it's really cool to check out. So Landon, do you have any final thoughts? And then we'll let Dr. Ray get back on his journey of helping people recover.
I was just going to say one of my favorite parts about the whole book is that it's short. It's like 12 chapters. It's like all this stuff we talked about's in 12 chapters. It's just, it hits you and you can get through it and you're just blown away. So encourage everyone to get the book. It's probably 6 or 7 hours to read the whole thing, and you'll just be, your mind will be opened.
Yep. Your mind will be open.
It's on Audible. I actually read it on Audible, and it's on ebooks as well. So you can get it any of the 3 ways.
Yep. And we also, again, will recommend Sex and God, How Religion Ruins Sexuality. We learned
how religion distorts
sexuality. That's right. Sorry. I went a step farther and I said ruin. The answer is just
radical here. You're getting radical
back here somewhere. I'm afraid if I pull out any of these books, the whole thing is going to collapse because it's just balancing here on my couch. It has collapsed before. It's kind of funny when it happens. I think people are like kind of waiting, hoping that it will.
And that's one of our all-time favorite books. It has humor, and it has but it has facts, and you're laughing and you're going, oh, that's interesting. It's really a great book.
That's what happened to me, right?
That way,
yeah, that's what we're all trying to figure out. What the hell happened to me? Now we know. So, well, this has been really enlightening, and I really hope that our listeners and our viewers will please comment and let us know what you thought about what we talked about tonight. Does this make sense? This idea of the virus, can you sort of put this in the framework and start to sort of understand just how everything is operating in your life as you're stepping away, and being able to understand those of your family members and friends that are still in a high demand, high control situation. So please like and subscribe also to Mormonish. And if you would like to be made aware of when new episodes come out, you can hit that notification bell. If you would like to support Mormonish Podcast financially, we have links in the show notes to PayPal and to Venmo. And we really appreciate those of you that do support us. It means so much to us. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Ray. It was so fun to see you again. You're one of our very favorite guests. It's just awesome. So,
all right. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Oh, yes. There will be it again, I'm sure. There always is. So, all right, everybody. Thanks so much one more time from Mormonish. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.